Hi, my name is Cynthia and I'm the graduate assistant for our off-campus and commuter services department here at West Chester University. I'm super excited that you're here joining me today for our Preparing for Life off-campus presentation. I'll be going through a variety of different topics related to moving off campus and preparing to live off campus here today, a lot of which are going to relate to best practices for self-advocacy, as well as some differences between living on and off campus. We'll also go through some scenarios of how to best utilize these tips and tricks and best practices to make sure that you're really prepared to move off campus. By the end of this presentation, we hope that you're able to identify 2 ways to self-advocate for yourself while living off campus, that you'll be able to describe 1 difference between living on campus and off campus, and that you'll be able to identify 2 common borough citations that are frequently issued to WCU students living off campus. This presentation is also a Ramplan program, so you will be prompted to fill out an assessment at the end of this presentation that'll assess your learning, and then provided that you answer the questions correctly, this presentation will be added to your Ramplan transcript. So before we jump into things, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our office's mission and what we do here on campus. OCCS's mission is to ensure that off-campus and commuter students have equitable access to co-curricular experiences and institutional resources. We also have a host of different leadership opportunities and programs that we provide around campus. We have programs such as our Commuter Mentoring Program, Commuter Success Day, Moving Off Campus 101, and our Off-Campus Housing Fair. If you're interested in any of these leadership opportunities or becoming a commuter assistant or just learning more about some of these programs, we encourage you to stop by our office in Sykes 238. We also have a couple of additional resources that I didn't mention on the other slide, such as student legal aid and having a one-on-one with one of our staff members. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our student legal aid, this is a fantastic resource for students where if you sign up on RamConnect, you get a free 15-minute meeting with our on-campus lawyer to discuss any legal questions you might have. So for off-campus things, it could be going over a lease that you're thinking about signing. It could be going through a borough citation, or it could be discussing an issue with the lawyer about a landlord or tenant responsibility that you're a little unsure of. Our lawyer, she also talks about things other than off-campus and housing related issues. She's really any legal question you have, she can answer or give her opinion on it. And then another great opportunity is meeting one-on-one with one of our staff members. So you can email commuters@wcupa.edu to set up an appointment, or even just dropping by our office in Sykes 238 to see if anybody's available at the moment is another really great option. So I like to start this presentation with a general timeline of the typical off-campus housing search and transition period. For those of you who have attended the Moving Off Campus 101 session, you might recognize this slide. If you haven't attended the Moving Off Campus 101 session, you can go to the OCCS website where you can watch a recording of the program and learn more about the beginning processes of moving off campus. Those processes are typically happening in the fall semester, which I won't go over as much here. Instead, I'll be focusing on our spring and summer portions of the moving off campus timeline. Today, we'll be learning how to engage and communicate with roommates, as well as planning the rest of your transition off campus. And I'll touch a little bit on some of the coordinating that occurs between roommates, family members, and landlords that occurs during the summer. Now we've transitioned into the bulk of our presentation material here, and I want to start off with the biggest differences between living on and off campus. We've identified 5 of the biggest differences for students who go from living on campus to living off campus. So the first difference are maintenance issues. Usually when you live on campus and you have a maintenance issue, let's say an AC unit isn't working, you'll submit a work order online. You'll maybe go to the front desk or go to see your RA, and they'll help you put in the work order. You'll get a confirmation email. You'll get an email when they come by and fix the broken item, which is great and fantastic when you're living on campus. But it's different when you live off campus. When you're living off campus, there's not a standard form for any maintenance issues. And depending on the terms of your lease, you might have to contact your landlord. You might have to contact a designated handy person. And that is different than submitting a work order. You might have to wait and make sure that you're in your apartment or in your house when someone comes over to fix the issue. You don't necessarily get the email and confirmation and constant communication that you do have when you're on campus with those work orders. The second big difference is who is enforcing the rules. When you're on campus, you have a resident assistant who lives down the hall from you. You have them enforcing the quiet hours, making sure that nothing crazy is really happening during the day. Whereas when you're living off campus, you don't have the RA living down the hall. You have you and your roommates in your apartment. However, you have borough police who are enforcing rules, which is different than when you interact with a resident assistant, which kind of brings us into the third big difference, which I think is arguably the biggest difference between living on and off campus, is the reprimands and how they are handled. So if you get in trouble when you're living in a residence hall, you go through the student conduct process. You get documented by an RA, you get an email, you show up to a hearing, and then the process usually wraps. However, when you're living off campus and you're documented through the borough police, you usually get a ticket, maybe a citation, and possibly a court date. You might have to show up to a court hearing. When you get in trouble off campus, Westchester University is also notified by the borough that a student gets in trouble. So in addition to getting a ticket and a citation, maybe a court hearing or a fine, you also have to go through the student conduct process that you would have to go through if you were living on campus. The fourth biggest difference are roommate conflicts. They're handled a little bit differently when you're living off campus. So when you're living on campus and you have a conflict with a roommate, you might go to your RA and talk to them and go through a mediation, where the RA maybe talks things through with the two of you, and hopefully it's resolved. But sometimes, if it's not resolved on campus, you can maybe get a room change or an option for one if it's available. When you're living off campus, that's not the case. If you have a roommate conflict, our office does offer mediations. We do hold those. However, they're voluntary. So we can't require or mandate that people show up to them. Everybody who in your house, in your apartment, all of your roommates have to voluntarily come to the mediation. And even then, there's not a room change option afterwards. So because a lease is a legal document, it's a lot harder to break a lease than it is to maybe change a room. So we highly, highly recommend that you go through a mediation to try and resolve whatever conflict is occurring, because we don't want you to have to go through a legal process of breaking a lease and maybe the fines and penalties that might be incurred from it. And finally, the fifth biggest difference that we see between living on campus and off campus is cleaning tasks and responsibilities. So if you live on campus, you live in a WCU managed housing, shared areas like bathrooms and lounges are cleaned by custodial staff. If you live in USH managed housing, it's more of the lounges and communal spaces. Regardless, areas that are shared by everybody in the building are cleaned by custodial staff. It's not the responsibility of you to clean up in a lounge after someone else. When you move off campus, though, that luxury of having custodial staff isn't there anymore. So you are now responsible for cleaning the kitchens, cleaning the dining spaces, bathrooms, things that are still shared by you and your roommates are now your responsibility. So when you're moving in, make sure that you bring some of those disinfectant wipes, bath and kitchen cleaners as well. So just to reiterate, because I think that this is a really important point, and it's something that does tend to get a lot of students who are living off campus, the rule enforcement and reprimands off campus are different than they are on campus. So on the left side of this Venn diagram, you can see that documentation occurs through residence assistants, public safety, and housing officials when you're living on campus. And on the right side, you can see the documentation occurs through borough and state police, maybe other borough representatives, when you're living off campus. And when you're living off campus, you go through the borough court systems. You also go through the student conduct process. The Westchester University Student Code of Conduct applies to students when they're on campus and in the borough. So just really making sure that you understand that if you move off campus, you're not free from all responsibilities. You're not free from all of the rules and codes of conduct that are also expected of students on campus. So I know it sounds like we're really hitting home on that, but I just want to make sure that you're prepared and have that information, because it is a really key aspect of living off campus, that not only do you have to abide by the borough rules and codes and requirements, you also still have to abide by the Westchester University Code of Conduct. So we'll jump into our self-advocacy best practices here. We have 6 steps, and they aren't just specific to living off campus. The examples I'll be giving are specific to it, since that's what this presentation is about, but these 6 steps can apply to really any area of self-advocacy, whether it's on campus, off campus, or another aspect of your life. So the first step of self-advocacy is be decisive. Decide on what you want, what you don't want, and be clear about it, right? Really knowing what you want and setting your goal is really a key part of self-advocating, making sure that you're not going back and forth on a decision or flip-flopping. Obviously, you want to make sure you consider all aspects of whatever you're deciding and making sure that you're confident with your decision. But once you make it, stick to it. Be confident in it and go for it. Second best practice is make sure you speak up. If you have a question or want something changed, ask someone. It never hurts to ask, and it'll always give you additional information. Third, make sure you educate yourself. Familiarize yourself with the subject of your decision. Specific to living off campus, make sure you familiarize yourself with PA renter laws, with Westchester Borough ordinances, and your lease. Make sure that you read through your lease and before you sign it. Make sure that you retain a copy of your lease, so that way you have something to reference later on in the year in case you have questions about it. Educating yourself is so incredibly important, because the more knowledge you have on a subject that you're advocating for, the better your argument and counter argument are going to be. And it's really hard to argue with someone who knows a lot about the subject, who knows PA renter laws inside and out. Our fourth step for self-advocacy: believe in yourself. You know what you want. You've done the research, you've educated yourself, you've been decisive. Be confident. It's really, really hard to argue with confidence. Fifth, make sure you stay cool, calm, and collective. And it might have been a tacky saying from 2010, but it's true. When you're advocating for yourself and others, stay calm and try not to let your emotions get the better of you. When emotions start to get involved, you become easier to dismiss and easier to write off. It's just, oh, there's just an angry student, angry about the same old, same old. So when you can be confident and calm under pressure, you're taken a lot more seriously and often treated better when you use the knowledge that you've gathered and stay calm through an argument. And finally, one that I want to emphasize very heavily because it's very important is document everything. And when I say everything, I truly mean everything. If you're not sure you should document it anyways just in case. When you're moving in, make sure you take pictures of your space. If you're moving in and you see that there's a scuff on your wall, or there's a dent in your door, or there's a rip in the carpet and a stain on the couch, or whatever it might be, take a picture. Make sure that there's a timestamp with it and put that away in a folder. So just in case at the end of the year when you go to move out, your landlord tries to charge you for a dent in the door, you can pull up a picture that says, no, when I moved in on August 13th of 2023, this dent was here and it was never fixed. You have that evidence to really back up your argument. Making sure that any conversation you have with your landlord, or even with roommates or people you're not super familiar with, that you might be living with, make sure that you document those conversations. You keep it in email, you have it in a text, or they leave you a voicemail, or if it's a verbal conversation, you follow up over email and say, hey, thanks so much for our conversation today. I just wanted to follow up and make sure that we're both on the same page then in making sure that we're going to have a handy person come out next week to fix the dent in the door. Making sure that you just have that paper trail is key to self-advocating. It's really easy to dismiss a verbal conversation in court. It's really difficult to deny a paper trail that comes with emails and pictures and timestamps. So we're going to jump into some scenarios here. There's 3 different ones. This first one we're going to start with is about roommates. You've noticed one of your roommates has been slacking on their chores around the house. They haven't done their dishes in days and didn't take the trash out to the curb, which meant that your trash was overflowing for the next week. I'm going to have you pause the video here for a second and keep in mind and think about what could you utilize and how could you utilize the best practices of self-advocacy to approach this situation. So now that you've paused the video and thought about that, maybe wrote some of your thoughts down, hopefully you said something along the lines of, maybe calling a house meeting to discuss your concerns, or texting your roommates to address them, and making sure that it's documented. Maybe approach your roommate immediately. Don't let things simmer. Be decisive about talking to them. Maybe if you've talked to them a couple of different times and it still keeps happening, you reach out to OCCS for a mediation. And finally, maybe you said our off-campus roommate agreement form. So this form is something that's been pulled together by our department for students to use when they live off campus. This is similar to the roommate agreement form that you might have used when you lived on campus, but this form is specific to the off-campus experience. There's sections that are specific to lease payments and divisions of housework, and it's a little bit more detailed than you might find if you're living in a room with just one roommate. It's not mandatory that you fill this out. It's not something we can require. It's not something a landlord can require. However, it is something that we strongly recommend that you take the time to do with all of your roommates, where you all sit down and really go through and set expectations for each other. The sooner that you can go through and do this, the better that your wanted behaviors will show up when you're living with roommates. It's really hard to course correct when you've seen behaviors and habits start to form that maybe aren't beneficial for the household. So you can scan the QR code that'll take you directly to the PDF for this form. You can edit it online, you can print it out, and we do have additional copies in our office as well. Our second scenario here. You come back to your house after spending all day on campus and see a citation on your door for violating the trash collection code. So again, take a moment to pause the video, think about how you would handle the situation. What would you do with a borough citation, and what could you do to self-advocate? So now that you've taken a minute to go through and think about how you would react in this situation. Maybe you said something along the lines of looking up the Borough of Westchester codes to see what it says about the trash collection policy. Um, Maybe you can go and utilize student legal aid and talk to the lawyer to see what actions and options you might have. You could go to the borough office and ask to speak with the enforcement and codes team and ask some questions, really making sure that you're educating yourself. The biggest takeaway from this that I think is really important is that sometimes self-advocacy isn't about being right, and it isn't about getting what you want. Sometimes self-advocacy is realizing and acknowledging, yeah, I messed that up. It wasn't my best move, or yeah, I definitely did forget to put the trash in the right spot. But it's acknowledging that and then making sure you don't make the same mistake in the future. Really taking it in and thinking about, okay, how am I going to change this in the future? So on the note of codes, here are 6 Westchester Borough codes to know. There are 3 codes that tend to be broken the most by Westchester students. So take a moment, pause the video, really read through each of these codes and some of the fines that are associated with them. Think about which 3 do you think are the most common for Westchester students to break when they're living in the borough. Now that you've gone through and read through each of these, I'm going to tell you which 3 of these 6 are commonly broken by Westchester students. So the first one is trash collection. Students tend to get in trouble for this just because they're not following the rules for putting the trash out and having it contained in those specific cans with lids. Second is alcohol violation. I think for obvious reasons that I don't really need to go into. And then third is noise violations, which again, I don't think that I necessarily need to go into that one. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you didn't pause the video, I highly recommend that you do take a moment to read through some of these other ones. I just want to call out the snow and occupancy codes, which are codes that I didn't realize needed to be followed in the borough. I didn't realize that you need to make sure that your walkway and driveway is plowed within 24 hours after snowfall. So just make sure you familiarize yourself with those codes so that way you're not getting fined or getting in trouble. And for our third scenario, your housemate noticed that the water bill was $200 more than usual this month and brought it up during the monthly house meeting. No one used more water this month to cause such a significant increase. Go ahead and pause the video and think about how should you and your housemates advocate for yourselves in this scenario. Is there really anything you can do? Hopefully you paused and took a moment to think about what you would do in this situation. As for what we recommend doing, go to your landlord and ask about the high water bill. Ask them if this is something that usually happens in, say, the winter or summer months. At the very least, notifying your landlord that you have a really high water bill and that you haven't done anything for it to increase that much lets the landlord know that, hey, maybe there's a leak somewhere. Maybe there's something happening that they need to be aware of. Another option is calling Aqua PA or your water provider and ask them why there's such a high spike in billing. Maybe there was a price change or maintenance or something that you're unaware of. And then your third option really is get your landlord to send someone out to check for any leaks. So sending out a handy person or a plumber just to make sure that there's nothing happening. So finally here, just some housing maintenance basics. These aren't things that you need to know how to do if you're living off campus. They're just helpful little tidbits of knowledge to have in the back of your head in case something's going on. So knowing where your breaker box is, If something electronic won't turn on, go to the breaker box and look for switches that might have been flipped. If you're microwaving your dinner and all of a sudden the microwave shuts off, but the rest of the power in the house is still on, the breaker might have tripped. So if you go and look for it, it's a really easy fix. You just flip the breaker back. Second, water shut off. This is helpful to know in case there's a pipe that bursts and maybe things are flooding and you don't want electronics or your materials to get wet. It turns off the water to the entire house or apartment, so it's certainly a last-ditch effort, but it's helpful if there's a pipe that bursts and you don't want water getting everywhere. And then third, finally, just knowing what type of heating system you have, whether it be gas, oil, or electric, can be really helpful, especially knowing if you have gas or oil, so you can make sure that if you smell gas, you know that, oh no, that might be the heat, and then calling your landlord or whoever's responsible. And again, I just want to emphasize that you don't need to know these things. They're just helpful pieces of knowledge to have in the back of your head in case something were to come up and you don't necessarily want to wait for a landlord or a handy person to come out to fix something that you could do in a very short amount of time. That wraps our presentation for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you feel more prepared for the transition off campus and have some solid plans for how you'll practice self-advocacy as an off-campus student. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to commuters@wcupa.edu. And if you scan the QR code on the screen, it'll take you right to the RAM plan assessment where you'll fill out 3 questions. And then hopefully this presentation will be added to your overall RAM plan transcript.